competition. And in today's class, we'll talk about the long run as well, but we'll do a quick recap first. So there are four market structures that we have to talk about as part of our syllabus. The two we have already covered: perfect competition and monopoly. We discussed their characteristics, then we looked at their graphs, and then we saw that what's the difference between the short run and the long run in both the two market structures. Now, this is the third one that we started off yesterday. In this one, we said monopolistic competition market structure usually exists in consumer markets, right? So consumer markets meaning clothes, shoes, laptops, accessories, cosmetics, and all these things, right? And what's the main feature of monopolistic competition? That there are many firms that are producing similar products, but they have unique characteristics. So if you look at the ad for Coke and Pepsi, even though they are very similar, but they will be focusing on different things. So Coke might be showing that it's a cultural product, right? It helps people to socialize and connect. And Pepsi might be showing that when you drink this product, you become more adventurous, blah, 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 right? So their way of marketing and advertisement is very different. And they place a lot of emphasis in monopolistic competition. Firms place a lot of emphasis on branding and marketing, right? So there are also a couple of firms in monopolistic competition, but obviously not as much as we see in perfect competition. As far as the entry barriers are concerned, Preet, we discussed that monopolistic competition has low entry barriers. Low meaning that these can be overcome, but the competition from well-established firms is always a challenge, right? So competition from well-established firms is always a challenge in monopolistic competition. How so? Just imagine if you think of starting a new soft drink brand, it's not that of a problem, because I mean, it doesn't require a lot of investment. Even it's not a complicated product to produce. But why don't we see many soft drinks products coming up, especially in countries like Asian countries, if I say? The challenge is that the market has already been captured by bigger players, right? Who spend hundreds and thousands of millions of dollars on their branding, right? So that's one barrier that is hard to overcome. Okay. Then the next thing is firms in monopolistic competition, both price makers and price takers. So you can set your own prices, because at the end of the day, your brand is unique and different from your competitors. But if your prices are exceptionally higher than your competitors, then it's a problem, because then people will not buy your product and instead they'll buy your competitors' products. Now, these were the features that we've just discussed. Now we'll quickly look at the short-run equilibrium of monopolistic competition that we discussed yesterday, and then we'll come to the long run. Okay. Now, first thing that you have to do, as always, right? You have to make a graph and label the axes, right? So do remember that labeling axes is very important. It has its own marks, right? So you have always price and cost for market structure graphs. You have always price and cost on the y-axis, and you have the output on the x-axis, right? Then the second thing, like the first thing that you have to add to this graph is your demand curve. Now, would the demand curve be too elastic or relatively less elastic? The demand curve for monopolistic competition, would that be elastic or inelastic, right? That depends directly on the amount of competition that you have. It will be more elastic. Exactly. Why? Because there are relatively more firms that are producing this product. Then to the left of this, to the left of your demand curve would lie your marginal revenue. To the left of your demand curve would lie your marginal revenue, like this, right? It will also be relatively less steep, right? So this is your marginal revenue. Okay. Now, this being said, now we have to add two cost curves. We know the two cost curves that are added on any market structure graph are the marginal cost, right? The additional cost of producing one more unit of the good, and the last of all that we need to add is your ATC, right? So ATC is a U-shaped graph like this. Any confusion so far, right? Now this brings us towards the completion of our graph, but now we have to analyze it and see whether the firm is making normal profit or abnormal profit. So this is monopolistic competition that we have made, right? And this is the short run equilibrium. Monopolistic competition, short run equilibrium, right? Okay. Now, any firm meaning any private sector firm, the objective of any private sector firm is to maximize its profit. Do you agree with me, Preet? And for any firm, the profit maximization takes place where its marginal cost is equals to its marginal revenue. So where the marginal cost is equals to its marginal revenue, that's the point where the firm maximizes its profit, right? Now have a look at this. So downward sloping is your marginal revenue, upward sloping is your marginal cost. Where are the two curves intersecting? So the two curves are intersecting at this point. So you bring a dotted line down and connect it to the x-axis. So this is your profit maximization quantity. Then you take this up, then you take this line up and see where this touches with your demand curve. Why is that important? Because this will help you know the price at which you're selling each unit of the good. So you connected it with the y-axis and that showed you that you're selling each unit for, let's say, whatever amount, let's assume $100 per unit, right? Now see where this dotted line is touching or cutting your ATC, right? Which shows you the average total cost. And you connect it with your y-axis to know the cost of producing this good, to know the cost of producing this good. So let's say your ATC is $80 or $70 or anything, right? Like that, right? Easy, we go on this. Now, this being said, this shows us that per unit profit that the firm is making in this case is 100 minus 70, which is $30 per unit, right? And how many units you're selling? So let's say QP is 500. So $30 into 500 would give you the area of this rectangle that I'm shading in front of you. And this area shows the abnormal or supernormal profit that the business, this firm in monopolistic competition has made, right? As simple as that. Is this clear? Preet, any confusion so far? Right? Now, what happens in the long run? Since the entry barriers are not very high, you will see new firms entering the market. You will see new firms entering the market, right? So in the long run, when new firms enter, what will happen, as we discussed towards the end of the last class, you will see that existing firms will lose their market share. Their market share will decrease, obviously, because the market size is the same. So the same number of customers exist in the market for soft drink, or let's say for clothes or for shoes, right? But if more firms have set up in the longer run, then the market share of existing firms will decrease. Do you agree with me? Now, what happens that the demand of each firm, demand curve of each firm will shift to the right or to the left? With decrease in market share, Preet, the demand of each firm would shift to the left or to the right? Would shift to the left. Excellent, right? So it would decrease like this. Let me first draw this and then I'll tell you, right? It will, Preet, are you getting me? It will decrease and will shift to the right, and it's a parallel shift. So I'm showing you on this graph so that you get a better idea. So the demand curve from the purple line has shifted back to the orange line, right? So this one, let's say this is the new one that I've made. Is this simple? Demand decrease. Excellent, right? Now the other things stay the same. Now demand curve has shifted to the left because each firm is now satisfying, is now capturing less of market share. To the left of that would lie your marginal revenue like this, right? So this is your marginal revenue. The upper one was your demand curve, which also shows you the price, which also shows you the price, demand, price, and average revenue, right? We all know this already. And now the two graphs that you need to add to this is your marginal cost, like this J-shaped graph. Okay, by the way, marginal cost would not change, and the ATC, marginal cost and the ATC of the business will not change in between the short and the long run, right? So those curves would stay the same, right? Okay, now just a second. In this case, yeah, in the long run, you have to do a trick, and I'll tell you what the trick is. In the long run, your ATC would be tangent to your demand curve. Preet, let me draw it first, and then I'll explain you what I technically mean. It has to be normal profit. So therefore, we know in the case of normal profit, what happens? Your demand curve is tangent to your price, because that means your price is equals to you. This is a better one that I got over here, right? So when the price is equals to the ATC, that is what, Preet? That is normal profit. So have a look at this. Now, if you compare these two graphs, let me get rid of the extra thing, right? So demand has shifted left, and you could also see over here that the demand curve was becoming tangent to the ATC curve. And that is exactly what I've drawn over here, right? Now let's do the analysis and you will be able to understand. By the way, it's a little it should have been tangent at this point. It should have been tangent at this point, which is the profit maximization quantity, right? So, I mean, it's right. This is where it is, because think about this. This is the profit maximization quantity where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? So this is the quantity that the firm will produce. You extend this line up like we have always done, right? And you see where this cuts, where it touches your ATC, right? So at this point, your ATC should be tangent to your, at this point, your ATC should be tangent to your demand curve, right? So let's do some hit and trial. Like this, right? Somewhat like this. Does it make sense? Breathe. Now think about this. Now, when you extend this dotted line up, which is your profit maximization quantity, and see where this is touching with your demand curve. Now, if you see, this is the same point, which is your price and your ATC. So this is your price and your ATC, which means that in this case, your price has come down to what was your ATC previously, because the ATC hasn't shifted. Do you understand? Breathe. So the ATC didn't shift. ATC has stayed at the same point as it was previously, but your demand curve has shifted back from this purple line to this orange line because of the fact that now you have less market share. Does this make sense? So this means that your price has shifted down to this level where your ATC was, right? And hence now we know that you're earning, we know that you're earning what? Normal profit, abnormal profit. Now you're earning normal profit. So this is your price slash your ATC, right? So we know that this is your normal profit, right? Because price is equals to ATC. Does it make sense? Right? So in the monopolistic competition, just like perfect competition, in the long run, each firm will start earning normal profit, which means that in the long run, no new firm would then enter. Why? Because the abnormal profit has already shrunk to normal profit. Does it make sense? Is it simple, right? So that's what you need to know. Okay, now let's come back to our notes and let's write this down, right? Long run equilibrium in monopolistic competition. Right. Now, the first thing is, right. So in the short run, we saw that firms make abnormal profit. Can you see the screen? Short run, each firm has the high market share, and therefore abnormal or supernormal profit. However, this attracts more firms longer run, causing a leftward shift in every firm's demand curve. And so the abnormal profit comes down to, okay, right? Does it make sense? Right, Preet? So that is what we have discussed for all the other markets as well, like all the other markets, in the sense that monopoly, you earn abnormal profit in the short run, you also earn abnormal profit in the long run because of the fact that the entry barriers are so high that no new firms can enter, right? So monopoly continue earning the abnormal profit that it was earning in the short run. But in perfect competition and in monopolistic competition, both in the short, like in both the markets, what happens that in the short run, you are earning abnormal profit. given the fact that they're relatively lesser firms and each firm gets to capture a bigger market share, right? And therefore, their prices are higher, their demand curves are higher, and therefore their prices greater than their ATC, hence making them earn abnormal profit. However, in the long run, what happens when other firms see that you're making abnormal profit in this market, they enter because entry barrier is not that high. We know this. When that happens, each firm's market share decreases because for the same market, now you have more and more firms, right? So for each, so let's say if this was the size of the market, right? If this is the size of the market previously, let's say they were right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these firms, right? So each firm was earning abnormal profit. Now, in the longer run, other firms also enter. So every firm's market share, the share of the pie obviously reduces, and therefore their prices, decrease. And when the prices decrease, what happens? That your abnormal profit gets translated into normal profit. Is this clear? Is this simple? Okay. Now, if this is clear, then we'll start off with the fourth and the last type of market share, market structure, which is oligopoly. Now, this is something which is a little tricky. This market structure is little, complicated, but don't worry, we'll get a hold of it. Okay, now what is oligopoly? Let's first have some basic discussion that we have always had about these different markets to understand that what each type of market is about. Oligopoly is a market. Now think about this. If you think of very big, very industries which have very big firms, example would be, and few firms. So markets where product is complicated and therefore there are few large firms, right? So markets where the product is complicated and expensive, or expensive, and there are few large firms only, right? Okay, now think about this. So Preet, can you try to imagine any market that you know where the total number of firms are not more than 5 to 7, 5, 7 maximum? Can you think of any market in your country or any other, by your understanding of any other country economies, any market where there are just 5 to 7, firms, not more? Yeah, right. Bus services. Okay. Yeah. What type of intercity buses? Intercity buses travel. Can you specify a little bit? Air travel. Air travel. Excellent. That's a very good. Yes, air travel. Let me give you some more examples. What about the telecommunication industry? I'm sure exactly. Airline industry is definitely like that. Think about the telecommunication industry, right? So in Pakistan, we had 5 firms that used to provide these, mobile network services and everything. And then the 2 out of those merged, exactly, network and communication. So the 2 merged, now we have only total of 4. Similarly, in USA, I know for a fact that there are 4 or 5 firms that are providing telecommunication and so on, right? Now, why is that the case? Because the product is complicated. How is that complicated? Just imagine. I mean, it's related to information technology, right? Signals and all that stuff, and covering a huge country, like big countries especially. I mean, it's a big challenge. And then the investment requirement is also very expensive, right? You have to put up the signal towers, you must have seen, right? So, I mean, that requires a huge amount of investment. And therefore, there are only few firms that are large enough to produce that product, right? Another good example of oligopoly would be oil industry, right? In the oil market, if you look at how many brands of oil stations do you know of, right? 6, 7 max, right? Industry, markets like telecommunication, airline industry, um, oil and gas industry are the ones that would classify as oligopoly. Does this help? Is it making sense, right? So we will come to the characteristics part in a bit, and we'll list down all the characteristics and features of oligopoly. But before that, we need to get an idea of what oligopoly market is and how that operates. Excellent, right? So what we have said over here is that markets where the product is complicated and expensive to produce, right? And therefore, there are few large firms. Market, why? Because when there will be fewer firms, then their size will be relatively huge, right? So if you think of each telecommunication industry or each telecommunication firm, I mean, that's massive in size. Similarly, if you think of Shell is big company on its own, right? Extracts oil in different countries. It's, I think, a Dutch company or what, right? It mines oil from the land and then, refines it and then retails it, sell it to the final consumer, and so on and so forth, right? So these are huge companies. So telecommunication, airline industry, what we were talking about the other day, airline industry, if you see, there are few big international airline carriers, right? Very big. Etihad, Qatar, Emirates, right? So these are some big companies, and obviously I'm sure that there will be few others, British Airways, American Airways, right? And so on. So these are the industries that would be classified as oligopoly. Now, if we move on and talk about the characteristics oligopoly, right? So the first thing we have already kind of identified that there are few firms, right? Few large firms, right? In oligopoly, there are few large firms. Large firms are captured big. Obviously, when there will be few firms, they would have bigger market share, right? Few large firms which have captured a big market share. That's the first characteristics. Then there are relatively high entry barriers. Now, this is different, right? Think about this. So in Monopoly, I said that the entry barriers are very high, right? And that is the reason why no other firm can penetrate the Monopoly market even in the long run, right? Here, I'm not saying that the entry barriers are very high, but I'm saying that they are relatively high entry barriers in terms of complication, technologically complicated product, and the amount of investment needed to set up the operations. Okay. I think that is why the entry barrier is high in oligopoly market. So the two major reasons for that, right? And we can also verify this thing by knowing the nature of the telecommunication industry, or by knowing the nature of airline industry, or by knowing the nature of oil and gas industry, that the entry barriers are relatively high. They are relatively high entry barriers in terms of producing a technologically complicated product, right? It's a complicated product. Like if you think of oil extraction, it's no joke. You need huge machines, investment requirement is high. You need a lot of technical knowledge, then how to process and refine oil, and then how to transport it to far off places. And I mean, that requires a lot of technology, and that requires a lot of investment. Same goes for telecommunication industries. Telecommunication, right? You have to set up signal towers, you have to know how this technology works and all that stuff, right? And all that, right? So that's why there are few firms, and you will not see a lot of firms in this market. But here comes another interesting point. Here is price rigidity between firms. There is price, right? Just a second. This price rigidity, which prevents a single firm to change the product price, right? Okay, I'll tell you in a bit, right, what that means. But before that, we have to know another characteristic of oligopoly market, and that is most of the times the good is produced by in oligopoly is homogeneous. Okay, think about this. So think about this. So if you think about these firms that I have listed over here, these industries. So airline industry, first let's talk about with the oil and gas, right? So the oil that is used in USA, right? The composition of the petrol or the diesel that's used in USA, that is exactly the same composition that we use in Pakistan, India, China, any other country, because it's a chemical, right? It's basically um, a product which has same chemical structure across the globe, right? So the product is homogeneous, right? First thing. Similarly, sorry for that. Similarly, if you think about airline industry, obviously there are differences between the service that different airline carriers provide, but I mean, at the end of the day, they are all using the same type of, they are same models of the aircraft that they're using, passenger airlines I'm talking about, right? So they are also quite similar in that sense. And same goes for telecommunication industry, right? So whether you use one network or you switch to another network, more or less the services and all that stuff would be quite similar. Now, that's why I said that most of the times, right, the nature of the good produced by firms and oligopolies homogeneous, right, similar. Now when that happens, now this is something very interesting. When the nature of the good is homogeneous, that's why there is price rigidity which prevents a single firm to change the product price. Now this is something that you have to pay attention to. Preet, think about this. If you see that, let's say in Pakistan, let me give you the example of Pakistan. If Etihad and Emirates, I've traveled through both, right? So for Etihad and Emirates, the services are quite similar. If I see that Etihad is charging more, if every time Etihad fares are higher than, Emirates, then I would not go with Etihad, I would go with Emirates, right? Yes or no? Similarly, if you think of, especially for a product like oil production, right? So it's exactly the same. So we have one local, like government owned firm, which is PSO, Pakistan State Oil. And then we have Shell and we have other oil stations. So if the quality is the same and PSO is charging higher, then I would not buy from PSO. Instead, I'll buy from Shell. Yes or no? Does it make sense? So what I'm trying to say that if a single firm is charging a higher price, you would switch because the nature of the good is homogeneous, right? The products are similar. You would switch to its competitors. You'll not buy from the firm that is more expensive, right? Because the nature of the good is homogeneous. Did this make sense? Does it make sense? Preet? Right? So the fact that there is price rigidity in oligopoly markets, which we'll talk more about in the graph that we'll look at, is because of the fact that the products in this market is homogeneous. Right? Preet? Is it making sense? So since the nature of the goods in oligopoly market is homogeneous, therefore, there is price rigidity, which prevents a single firm to change the product price, right? This is making sense. And then comes in another point. To overcome the problem of price rigidity, the firm oligopoly markets are very likely to form a collusion. Right? Does it make sense? So since there is, right, so since there is price rigidity uh, between firms in oligopoly markets, therefore, it's very likely that the firms will form a collusion, right? Now, what is collusion? We'll talk more about that. But before we move on, as I said, it's a relatively complicated market structure, right? And it will take us at least 2 classes to complete, but, should not be that difficult. Okay. Now, what is the nature of oligopoly markets? So first thing that we have discussed, that oligopoly markets are markets where the nature of the good is complicated and expensive to produce because it requires huge investment, and there are only few large firms, right? Now, what type of markets would classify as oligopoly market structure? Telecommunication industry, airline industry, oil and gas industry, and so on. Now, talking about the characteristics of oligopoly market, there are few large firms with high market share. That's the first thing, right? Then there are relatively high entry barriers. Why? Because the nature of the good is technologically complicated, right? And you require huge investment to set up the operations. That's the second thing, right? then most of the times the nature of the good is homogeneous, which means what? If the good has homogeneous nature, then people are not willing to pay a higher price, just like we saw in perfect competition. Okay, now there's this minute difference between perfect competition and oligopoly when it comes to homogeneous nature of the good. In perfect competition, the nature is completely homogeneous. The nature is completely homogeneous. Yes or no, right? Because think about this, there is no difference when it comes to the fruits or the vegetables, right? Right? So those are exactly the same across the country at least. So here there can be minute differences, like the services of Etihad might be a little better than the other company. Similarly, some people say that oil composition of one firm is better than the other one, that's more pure, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But we do know that there isn't much of a difference. So therefore, people would not be willing to pay a higher price to any firm. And this is the reason why there is price rigidity between the firm. Now, what is rigidity? Rigidity is something, basically it means that it's hard to change. What is rigid? Hard to change, right? So if you cannot move, increase or decrease the prices easily in this market, that is the name that we are using here to explain that there's price rigidity, that prices are not very flexible, and no single firm. Like why is that the case? So let me give you an example. As I said, if Pakistan State Oil starts charging higher price for each liter of fuel in Pakistan, people will automatically switch to Shell, right? Product is the same. Why would you want to pay a higher price for a firm? Then the last of all is to overcome the problem of rigidity. Firms in oligopoly markets are very likely to form a collusion. Now, this is a very important point. This is a very important point that we'll talk about more, that what is collusion, how that works, and all that stuff, right? Okay. Now, this being said, Preet, we'll stop here for today. And, I think this is good chunk that we have covered today, and we will resume our classes in on Monday. And let me tell you, as far as the syllabus is concerned, so we are towards the completion of unit 2. We're towards the completion of unit 2, which was the largest unit. After this, we can practice some past paper questions and all, right? Then hopefully we'll be done with unit 2 by, even if I, add some margin. So by 2nd December, we should be done, right? By Tuesday or Wednesday. Then unit 3 is not that extensive, but still it has some important topics that we have to cover. So unit 3 should be done like maximum 6-7 classes we need, right? So even if I add the margin, so 10th December, we should be done with that, right? Then unit 4 is also a little lengthy, so that would need, let's say, 7-8 classes. So 18th December, we should be done with that. And maximum, right? If we, continue with the pace, so we should be done with unit 5 by 26th or 27th of December, right? So by December, we would be completing our syllabus, right? A few minor topics might be left, right? But those we will be able to do once we practice past papers, right? So when exactly is your exams? End of February, mid-February, end of February, what? So even with this timeline, we have complete 1 month of January to practice our past papers. When are your exams, Preet? Cambridge exams? The dates. Economics 24th of February. So that means we have almost 2 months. Amazing. So we have 2 months for past paper practice. And then if there's any minor topic that we left, we'll be also able to do that. Others starting 15th of Feb. Okay, so let's keep it 15th of Feb, because then you might be getting busy with other subjects. So that means when we complete our syllabus by end of December, right, we have just 1.5. So we have still 1.5 month for complete past paper practice and all that. So we should be good, right? You also have your notes available. All the videos are available, right? And did you get to download my other notes? Did you download the other notes from our website? I would suggest download those and make a folder. Yeah, make a folder on your desktop and save those. So those and these would be, so these are more descriptive. Those are more, did you like those? Those are more to the point. Those are more to the point and just the basic concepts. These are more descriptive, which you need to, really know what to write. Perfect. So I'll see you on Monday. Have a good weekend, and we'll continue from here. Right? Okay. Take care. Take care. Have a good night, Preet.